The long-awaited day is finally here. The die cards are live in my shop. And before I get into this, I need to say a heartfelt and deeply grateful thank you to the backers at GoFundMe and Ko-Fi who allowed this to happen, because I had to buy several hundred mini skeins and every single color from 7 different dye lines. And then I had to spend more than a month and a half carefully measuring tiny amounts of dye for every single one of these. I couldn't just throw the dye in a jar and eyeball it. It had to be exactly 1.5% or 3% or 2%, whatever the case may be. So without you guys, I would not have been able to have afforded the Canon Rebel or the macro lens that I shot all of these with. And also my husband spent his nights and weekends individually light balancing and color adjusting these to be as true to life as possible. Obviously, a camera shoots in like RBG and then that gets translated to CYMK when it gets printed. So there is minor variations between colors that they look slightly different in real life. Usually the blues, reds, and hot pinks, the rest of them are pretty accurate. Anyway, so thank you guys, and let's get into colors I love, things I think each dye line does well, what I think is worthwhile purchasing and what I think isn't. And let's get into it. So we're going to start with Aljo. Oh, hold on. It just occurred to me. These are available for sale in my shop, www.frostjarn.com. If you buy these between now and Friday, obviously it's pre-sale because I have to have them professionally printed, and then I laminate each one by hand, which takes about 1 minute and 15 seconds per page. So they will be shipping in November. However, if you order in the pre-sale, you will get one of these, which is just a handy dandy color picker chart, how to choose colors that work well together, color theory. You'll get a technique picker. These are what I bring to my classes when I teach. So it just shows you what each application style looks like, along with a knitted swatch. And you will, is that it? Oh no. You'll also get this lovely chart, and it just tells you the exact amount of dye if you're using 10 grams, 20 grams, 30 grams, etc., up to 100. The shade, 0.5% all the way to 5% or 6%. My personal dye stock recipe, and some background information on like what pH your fiber needs to be for the dye to strike optimally. So these extras will not be available after Friday. Anyway, let's get into it. So Pro-chem, this is my favorite line. The reason being, I've been buying from them since 2009, and every single batch is pretty much identical to the previous one, meaning the undertone is the same. The powder, the way they mill it, the consistency is the same. So if I speckle with a certain color, they don't reformulate it into a type of powder that doesn't drop cleanly on the yarn. So that's what I love about them. They also have over 100 colors, and they're the most comprehensive range. This is their wash fast acid dye line. There are obviously their brilliant violet, which is an amazing color, does tend to turn clumpy and tar-like, and if you don't wipe the tar out and you get it stuck to your yarn, it could cause a bleed, because it just is like a paste that doesn't adhere to the yarn, and it will just bleed and bleed and bleed forever and cause a crunchy spot in the yarn. Aside from that one color, I'm really impressed with how this dye line behaves overall. There are obviously certain colors that have worked well for me, and other colors like bright red that have not, that get scummy and turn to gel. So if you're going to buy anything from Pro-chem, these are my favorites. Rhodamine red, hot pink, turquoise, brilliant violet, flavine yellow, jet black. Those are my hallmark favorite colors. Moving on to Aljo. This line, I think that this is kind of an older line. When you can't order from their website, you have to call them and then like fax in your credit card information, which is not very convenient. The nice thing is they do have these little tiny sample packets you can buy of each color, which allowed me to buy the whole dye line for like $130 as opposed to having to buy 2 ounces or 4 ounces of every color. Overall, it's a perfectly lovely dye line. It's got the same number of colors as Jacquard, which is 40, but these are the colors I think stand out, and these are the ones I personally bought. Lily Rose. Now, Lily Rose does have a bit of a bleed. Not a significant one, but you can rinse it and rinse it and rinse it, and it just doesn't seem to get to clear. But the color is a stunning, hot, peachy pink, and I love it, so I'm willing to put up with that. Violamine, a very, very saturated, rich purple that I don't see in any other line. I also really liked their military green. I just thought it was a great deep avocado green. And their pearl gray is stunning, and it speckles well. Now, Ashford. I appreciate that way back in the day, probably the early 90s, if not before, that they created dyes. You know, they have wheels, they have drum carders, and I appreciate that they milled some dyes, but there are 9 colors. And some of the colors, like the formulation on the yellow dye is like the it's like coffee crystals. Like it's so bulky. It's not a powder at all. And if you wanted to speckle something with yellow, you would not be able to use this brand. Other than that, it's like around $60 for a tub of their dye, or $90 for like a 1/4 ounce of each color. And it is incredibly, it has not kept up with the times. Dharma's average dye cost is about $5.60. Some of them are as low as $3 for 2 ounces. Some of them are as much as $7. But I don't know where they get their dye milled. It's probably in country, but it is incredibly expensive, very limited, and the performance is not anything to write home about, especially when you take into account, like, they only have these colors. So I don't recommend Ashford unless you're in a country that this is your only option. And if this is your only option, it definitely dyes wool, but at about 900% the cost of their competitors. So you choose. Dharma's Wash Fast Acid. So they have like 85 colors, a lot of redundant blues in my opinion. The thing I love about Dharma is their accessibility and how quickly they ship, and that they have gone out of their way to create an affordable dye line. But they have consistency issues. If you go on their website at any given time, in red underneath any particular color, they'll say like runs brownish, or undertone has changed, or whatever. You know, they note that the previous batch does not perform like the current batch. And if you are a large volume dyer and you're creating colorways that you're shipping to yarn shops across the country with their line, and you order, say, a new tobacco leaf, and this one is significantly greener and doesn't have the same mill type, so it's no longer speckling well the way that it used to, and someone buys one from one lot and one from another lot, and those colors don't match up, it's usually the dye. And that's why I don't teach with Dharma anymore. But I will tell you, there are colors they have that no one else has and I really like. So those colors are fluorescent orange, and it truly fluoresces under black light. No one else makes a fluorescent orange. Their fluorescent lemon is significantly less expensive than Pro-chem's flavine yellow, but it does the same job, and it's just as concentrated, fluorescent screaming yellow. I also love Midnight Blue and Extreme Blue from them, and those two colors tend to be milled more consistently than some of the others. I don't like their fluorescent fuchsia. It bleeds. I would go with Hot Pink from Pro-chem. I also buy their aubergine and their, Cabernet. However, I've heard people have had issues with those colors bleeding on them. I have not had that, but of course, they could have gotten a bleeding batch and I could have gotten a good one. I don't love the color. They have a fluorescent green, and it's called, hold on, let me look it up real quick. Radioactive. It's called Radioactive. If I was going to create a fluorescent green, I would probably make it more screaming neon than this. I find it to be a bit dusty and dirty, but I do use it for speckling in my blacklight reactive colorways that I want all the colors to glow. So that one's worthwhile. And then another color they have, Purple Pop. it breaks in its component parts. So when you speckle with it, you will see blues and pinks separate. So the two, it's really extreme blue and fluorescent fuchsia just mushed together in a color. So if you want a more stable hot purple, you can mix between hot pink and fluorescent blue, or I'm sorry, extreme blue, and you will get that color. But if you want to speckle with something, you are going to have a haze of pink behind your speckle and like a bluish speckle in the middle. So it's not going to give you a hot purple speckle for the most part. Also, the reason it does that is because the dye is striking in its component parts. So the blue is striking at a different temperature than the pink, and that's why it's so patchy. But this is hand-dyed yarn. Like if you want solid shade yarn, go get it from Cascade for $8 a skein. I don't think it makes sense to buy indie dyed yarn that's solid shade and is dead solid because it's really expensive, and you can get the same thing that's mill dyed for a lot less. Another thing, if you want a truly stunning neon purple, let me go show you. So like I was saying, for an incredible screaming neon purple, I don't actually go with Purple Pop. I use rhodamine red from Pro-chem. This is at 3%. And then I made a dye study. So this is 15% brilliant violet and 85% rhodamine red. And then I think this one is 70-30, 50-50, another 70-30, and then here we have our brilliant violet 100%. So I think all of the best stable hot purples are between these two colors. And I highly recommend that you start doing dye studies because I have this master book of all my favorite colors mounted on embroidery cards, and these are coin collector envelopes. But this is incredibly helpful when I work with a shop owner and pick out custom colors, and if they don't see what they're looking for, I do a little study between two colors they think would look good, and then we come up with the one. Now, moving on. If you want a really beautiful navy, I don't think anyone makes a good one, in my opinion. It's too flat, it looks almost black, and a lot of them bleed red when you rinse them. So what I have found is that it actually works really, really well. Let me take these out. Give me just one. So if you want a really, really rich dark blue, but you still want some of that jewel tone saturation in it, I find that mixing extreme blue and midnight from Dharma, and then this is just a little color study of it, gives you like such rich color. And I usually just do 85-15, 70-30, 50-50, meaning if it's 3% degree of strength on a 100 gram skein, that's 3 grams of extreme blue. And then the next color is whatever 85% of 3 grams is, which is like, what, 2.5 grams or whatever, and then 1.5 grams of extreme blue. And it just gives me a nice reference point to finding the color I want. I also find that mixing your dyes with black often yields unpredictable results, frankly, unless you use a tiny amount of black, because black overtakes everything. It does not mix well with orange or yellow, and quite a few greens and purples as well. In painting, you would mix black into your dye to deepen it, or into your paint, but that does not work with dyeing. So what I've found is mixing your darkest milled counterpoint with your brightest milled counterpoint yields really, really stunning results. So this is Lollipop Red, my favorite all-time red from Pro-chem. It strikes well, it's bright, it's beautiful. But I could mix this with black, but it turns like a burgundy, a flat burgundy, no real dimension when you mix it with black. But when you mix it with cabernet, you get this. And so anyway, if you want to know my dye secret, the darkest milled counterpoint for red is Cabernet from Dharma. The darkest milled blue that I like to use would be Midnight from Dharma. The darkest milled purple, and this is a red-based purple, is aubergine from Dharma, and the darkest milled green is actually spruce from Jacquard. So if you want to fuck around with using a neon and then toning it with its darkest milled counterpoint, you will get stunning results, I promise you. So hold on. Let's move on to standard colors. Not a lot of colors, 12. And again, you have to like call them and fax in your payment information. There is no like ordering online. And they also don't sell you anything less than a pound of dye. And one of their colors, it's a blue, was $70. So I have a pound of this color. Now, Peggy Doney of the 100th Sheep turned me on to this line. And she refers to it as a Renaissance rainbow. And I think that is accurate. There's no hot pink in here. And you could definitely do a lot of mixing to come up with colors in this line. But none of the, you're not going to get a fluorescent orange. You're not going to get a super poppy purple. However, these do not bleed, cake, gel, turn grainy, or separate, or turn into strike in their component parts, because they're milled to strike all at the same temperature. So if you were to mix a red and a blue, you wouldn't get patchy red sections and blue sections in your yarn. It strikes completely. It exhausts beautifully, and it all strikes at the same time. So that is the benefit to this dye line. You can get a lot of colors out of it too, but again, a pound of dye per color. So you're looking at spending several $100s, and you're going to have these huge tubs in your dye space. Greener shades. If you are conscious of the environment and you want to use something that's more natural than the synthetic pre-metallized or metallized dyes from Dharma, Pro-chem, etc., this is for you. Of course, if I'm not mistaken, their blue, they have like an asterisk on their website. I think it's the blue that says it indeed does have metal. All that means is if I were to take this big piece that I dyed back here and throw it in a landfill, this is going to take longer to decompose by like 100 years or something, because it's a synthetic dye. Things dyed with this supposedly biodegrade better and quicker. I think if you're very conscious about what you're dumping down your drain and what type of dye you're using, grow a garden of avocados and onion skins and mushrooms and mulberry leaves and walnut shells, and you can dye with that, and it is going to compost beautifully. Of course, your color palette is incredibly limited, and a lot of the colors like indigo or it's the red one, it's a bug anyway, cochineal, they're not friendly to the environment to create or source any more than using a synthetic dye. So someone who I think does an incredible job, if you're into natural dyeing, I am not, I don't teach it, I don't find it in any way creative or alluring, and I don't have any interest in ever going down natural dyeing path, but Pichinku fibers, Pichinku, they're out of Peru, stunning Technicolor, and it's all natural fibers. Go look at them on Instagram. There's a link to them below. You will see, they have these wonderful Peruvian women picking flowers on the mountainsides and dyeing in these natural colorways that they've been doing in textiles for generations. So they're your go-to if you want to see the height of natural dyeing, in my opinion. Jacquard. If you buy a 1/4 ounce from them, it's the same cost as 2 ounces from Dharma. It sort of equals out if you buy an 8-ounce tub, but that's like $20 a color after you factor in taxes and shipping. I feel like a lot of this line is functionally impaired. They have way too many reds that are basically the same. And most of their reds are they either bleed or they get cakey. So the dye down at the bottom does not dissolve into the water, or if it does dissolve a little bit, it settles down to the bottom. So, you know, their black is very brown and it creates a very yellowy gray if you shear it out to 1/10%. So that's not for me. Their turquoise is a bleeder. I don't know if they've fixed that since the last time I dye tested it, but the only color I own from this line is spruce, and I buy it by the 8-ounce jar because if I want a deep, rich, near black green, this one is it, and no one else makes anything that I think looks like it. So I think that is all the dye lines. We've gone through everything. If you have any questions, leave it in a comment below. Another thing, if you backed me on Ko-Fi or if you backed me on GoFundMe, you guys are going to be invited to a private Facebook group, the Frost Yarn Dye Masterclass, and it's sneak peeks on my forthcoming book. Every week I'm going to be showing either a new color from a new line, or I'm going to be doing like, here's the ultimate rainbow colorway, and I'll have knit swatches and crochet swatches and step-by-step tutorials and breakdowns. I will also be available to answer any of your questions. Why is this dye turning into a Jello jiggler within 20 minutes of mixing it? All that kind of stuff. So if you have donated to those campaigns, check your email and your spam because you have received a link to the die cards and also how to get an invitation to this group. Let's see. I didn't get to do landscape dyes, which is part of why this took so long. It turns out there's 90 colors and they're like $18.95 a color. And although I was able to source a good 30 of the colors, just getting samples from friends that own landscape, it is entirely too expensive. The dye is not pure dye. It's mixed with like citric acid and a proprietary blend of whatever. But if you're charging $18.95 for 4 ounces, but the 4 ounces doesn't go nearly as far because it's mixed with citric acid and whatever else you mixed it with. So I don't know any professional dyers that use landscape because it would be like adding quite a bit more to your profit or your bottom line away from your profit margin. Hopefully one day I'll be able to release landscape, but it's not going to be anytime soon. Another thing that's on the horizon, but I don't know if it'll be done by the end of the year, is basically a matrix, a poster-sized matrix of every single color from every one of these lines in order. So you can put it up on your wall in your dye studio and you can see 40 different greens all next to each other. But that is an incredibly time-consuming project, and I have 2 very small children and a fuck ton of other things to do. So if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. All of the links where to get this stuff, information on it, is in the description below. Thanks again, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.